Hello, I'm Kat Georges. I'm co-director of Three Rooms Press, and today we're speaking with ethnomusicologist and now author Jillian Marshall, whose book Japanthem has just come out. Japanthem: Countercultural Experiences, Cross-Cultural Remixes. A little bit about Jillian before we get started. Jillian Marshall grew up in rural Vermont, near the French-Canadian border, and she first encountered Japan in 2009?
2007, technically.
Okay, and graduated from University of Chicago with a degree in East Asian languages and civilizations. She taught middle school English for 2 years in a fishing village in Japan, then came back to the United States to pursue a doctorate at Cornell University. As part of her research, she spent years in Japan studying contemporary Japanese music with sponsorship from the Fulbright Foundation and MTV.
That is correct.
Wow. Her research took her from Tokyo basements for underground DJ sessions to the streets of the remote town of Ugo, Akita, to learn the dance of the Obon Festival, even high up on Mount Fuji, to investigate the nuances of a Japanese rave. All of her study led to her PhD and now her debut book, Japanthem. Jillian lives in New York City, and in our discussion today, she will fracture stereotypes of what it is to be a scholar and reveal music's fascinating relationship with the Japanese society. So hi, Jillian.
Such a glowing introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, your love of Japanese culture has deep roots. What first ignited your love of the culture?
That's a good question. So as stated in the introduction, I grew up in a really small rural town where cows outnumber people 6-1, and we didn't really have TV, so I wasn't really consuming any kind of Japanese media as a kid. I think I probably just looked at a map and said, that's as far away as you can go before you start coming back. Yeah. And I think that kind of planted some seeds of just interest in East Asia that didn't really come to my conscious mind until I went to college, and I started studying actually Chinese. And I studied abroad in Beijing in 2007, and on the way home I had one night in Tokyo, and I thought, well, I'm not going to stay in the airport, might as well hit the town. And when I got out, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the place. This is what I've been looking for. So it was kind of not really a conscious interest that I had pursued through, having my interest peaked in any kind of media or pop culture. It just kind of came about maybe as just a curiosity about something that's simultaneously very far away, literally and culturally, but also that just somehow felt familiar and just somehow inexplicably just felt like,
wow,
oh, I get this place.
Wow.
Sounding, not to sound culture appropriative or anything.
That's incredible. Well, your new book, Japanthem, began as a dissertation for your doctorate degree, but then it's been highly transformed into a accessible, often very funny memoir/examination of Japanese pop, traditional, and underground music scenes. What drove you to want to bridge the gap between academia and, popular culture?
Very good question. Well, actually, when I got my fellowship to do my primary fieldwork in Japan, which was jointly sponsored by Fulbright and MTV, the stipulation for the grant was to write a blog for MTV to post on their website. And during that time, I was actually writing about my experiences in a colloquial way for the first time, and not just in this kind of dry academic fashion where you're citing this, citing that, and that kind of got me hooked. Like, wow, this is a lot more fun to write than having to wade through 30,000 citations. So that really planted the seed. And then when I was writing my dissertation, I just thought, what I'm writing about, dare I say, is pretty cool. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do it if I thought it was boring. That was sort of the whole point.
Right.
And I thought, I kind of would, I don't want to make this inaccessible by using all this academic language and keeping it just sort of wrapped up in the ivory
Right.
tower.
Yeah.
No disrespect. So I wrote down the actual experiences that I had as opposed to the theories that I expounded upon, which I did write academically and theoretically. I wrote down the actual stories and experiences in a colloquial way, kind of as a way to give the reader a sense of being there, but also so I could take that stuff and publish it as an actual non-academic book if and when the time came after graduating.
Right. Wow. Well, you succeeded.
Thank you.
I love this book. Publishers Weekly says this is an outsider's look into Japanese culture via its music. This transformative work is a thrilling escape. So, speaking of escape, music is a big part of your personal life. You're a pianist, right?
This
Trumpet
is true,
player.
yes.
What else?
I've DJ'd only in Japan, actually, never in the U.S., but
Wow.
I guess technically that is on my list of musical things I do.
Did your preference in music change after you went to Japan?
Oh, definitely. The way that I've always listened to music is I get really involved with whatever it is that I love at the time, and then it just kind of expands into these different territories. And when I went to Japan the first time teaching middle school English in the fishing village, literally I think my first or second night I heard the drumming of a different Obon festival, not the one that I studied in my research and then eventually write about here, but a different one, a local one happening in the village, and I was just like, what are these drums? And I went out and I became really interested to see that this traditional music was very much a lived contemporary experience. It wasn't this thing that was shut away in a museum like, this instrument was played in the year 1300 and here is a replica. Like, that's just not for me. It was like, these are people like getting down in the street to this old school music, and that really got me interested. Really old. Yeah, about like almost 1,000 years old. And that just got me listening in a different way. And then of course underground music. I never really got into it in the U.S., but then it was when I was in Japan, and all of this, of course, is written here. But when I was in Japan, someone took me to a club, and I think that was at a time when I felt like enough of an outsider that the underground world appealed to me.
Right.
And I went to a club, and it felt like home. It was like, wow, this music is really dope. This is super cool. I've never heard anything like this. And so being in Japan and having a different set of social parameters that I was navigating allowed me to connect to music in a different way than I was here in the US.
Well, speaking of underground music and basement clubs in Tokyo, I love this one description that you have in the book of going to this Tokyo basement club and hearing a noise music DJ. So could you read that for us?
Sure.
All right.
That was on page
29, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll start at the end of page 28 here to lead in, just talking about the different underground scenes that exist in Japan and how they're all kind of different from each other. Perhaps that's why the underground scene in Osaka is so much lighter. Lounges where anyone is welcome, no questions asked. Even if you're in and out of jail due to a drug addiction, even if you're a suit 5 days a week and only rap on the weekends, even if you earn money whipping businessmen at an S&M bar, and even if you're a foreign graduate student. Just starting out? No problem. You can practice DJing here. You know what? Let's grab a drink so you can tell me about that dissertation you're writing. Hey, who went out and bought snacks for everyone to share? It was really nice. Let's do a special night of karaoke where everyone gets to sing. House music with positive messages of love and acceptance, albums produced and released entirely by friends, neo-disco, Japanese, shitty popusu, synth pop from the 70s and 80s, or religious chants mixed with Louis Armstrong. This was the vibe in Osaka, at least to me. Whereas in Tokyo, I once saw a guy slam his face into a cymbal, break a piece of plexiglass over his head, and throw himself on the ground as he was playing distorted Metallica records at maximum volume, all while taunting a bunch of sweaty dudes in a basement, plus me. This is too gentle for you, isn't it?
Wow. How did you feel after you left that club?
I couldn't really hear anything. That was the mark of a night well researched.
Okay, well, for sure. Well, you don't often hear of people receiving scholastic funding for going and researching a night like that or a rave culture. How'd you do it?
Well, how did I do it? I think I just you can very creatively stipulate the margins of one's research in the academic world, and that I did.
Great.
I probably just cited some sources creatively. But I mean, that's the thing about academia that I actually miss. If you have a good idea and you're just willing to write an organized and clear statement, you can have piles of money deposited into your bank account for really any kind of research.
Wow.
But I think this was I was proud of that. $500 I got to supplement. The second time I went to the rave for a weekend. I'd already returned from my field work, and I went back to Japan for 3 days. Do not recommend. I was jet lagged for 2 weeks.
Oh my God. Well, I find it really fascinating that all of your research was conducted in Japan as an American woman, non-Japanese American woman traveling by yourself. How was that? What were your experiences with that?
Well, first of all, Japan is really safe, and that's certainly made me feel okay about just going about my business alone. And people tend to just kind of stare at you, yes, but leave you alone, so that's okay. But in terms of doing the research, what was interesting, and I think this is important to acknowledge. Every researcher, every person is going to have their own experiences interacting with a culture, right? And so for me, as a tall, I am very tall.
How tall are you?
6'1",
Right.
shortest in my family. As a tall, very stereotypically foreign-looking foreigner in Japan, I think, and as a woman, I think, in a very dude-heavy DJ scene in particular, I got invited to a lot of parties, and I think that probably had to do with my foreignness and being a woman. But hey, for me, that was just less work for me to do. Yeah, I mean, honestly. And in terms of doing the research in the Buddhist dance world, it actually presented certain challenges, I would say, because I was so foreign, kind of being trying to get to know this space that was so insider, even in a Japanese societal context. So there were definitely boons and challenges, but they were, all of what made it this, multi-dimensional experience that it was doing this, research.
Well, speaking of women, you write a little bit about AKB48.
Yes.
And also a little bit about J-pop. Now, J-pop is, everybody knows about J-pop. What is AKB48 all about?
So AKB48 is a group assembled kind of, I think of him as the Max Martin of Japan, who was the guy that wrote all the songs for Britney Spears and stuff. He assembled this group that he had in mind to be like democratic, which is to say fans vote for the members, and it's more about the structure itself than the actual individual players. So AKB48 changes every season as fans vote for the new top members, or there's new people that graduate from the school and enter the school.
It's a girl group.
It is a girl group, 48 schoolgirls on stage. And I think they're probably less popular now than when I was doing my fieldwork, although it's like a corporate structure. There's blah 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 48 groups all over Japan, named for different cities. There's 48 groups in Jakarta, in Shanghai, in a lot of parts of Southeast Asia. And the way I didn't include this in the book, but I did write in my original dissertation, it was like the aesthetics of fascism with AKB48, because you have all these girls singing in unison. And I think this idea of unison and like liberation and happiness, because all their lyrics are very bubblegum, like you'll be happy, listen, like you'll be happy, let's be happy. And the main audience are people who are typically very unhappy, businessmen and such. So this trope of unison to me kind of signaled like one of us, join us, like you'll be happy if you're part of the group, which goes into, just speaking in very broad strokes, a very important aspect of Japanese sociocultural everyday politics. That the group is more important than the individual, that there is liberation in conformity because, well, there's a Japanese saying, I think that sums it up best, the nail that stands up gets beaten down. So I think that AKB48 kind of embodies this almost like utopian fantasy of Japanese, this particular aspect of Japanese culture kind of serving as a way of liberating the individual in a way. So I think that's like the seductive tactic to get people to listen to AKB48 as a marketing ploy.
Right. Speaking of marketing, so J-pop is that not kind of culture supported by the Japanese government as an export?
Certainly was during the time of my research, and that was ethnographic gold for me.
Right.
Researching J-pop, it's much different than researching traditional music or underground music because what's the scene? A YouTube video? That's not exactly like, how are you connecting with people? You know, going to a big arena show, which I couldn't do. I tried to buy tickets and they sold out instantly. What kind of community is that really? So instead, my research was directed toward getting interviews with people who worked in the Ministry of Economics, Ministry of Trade, and which was gold. Thank you, Fulbright.
Yeah.
But in any case, they kind of told me, like, following the Korean K-pop model, because K-pop continues to be hugely successful abroad and is a big moneymaker for the Korean economy.
Right.
The Japanese government kind of wanted to follow suit and push all of this pop culture stuff, including J-pop, but also manga, anime, which is just a Japanese word, by the way, for like cartoons. It's not like a specific subgenre like we think of it in the US, like anime.
Right.
It's animation, anime, that's just what it means. So they pushed it as just this kind of way of potentially making money, following suit from what the Korean government did with K-pop. And I think as a result of that, and given that it's a very kind of flat, consumer-based listening culture and just consumption culture in general, that's sort of why people outside Japan kind of think, oh, J-pop, Japan, cute, kawaii, like this sort of thing, when in fact that's just one aspect of Japan.
Right. Well, you go into a lot of that and in the book, and one thing I found fascinating is you did something that I thought was really interesting for a research. You researched underground DJs over in Japan, and then as an experiment, as part of your research, you brought them to the United States to do a short tour. How did that go?
Honestly, I wish I could have seen it and heard it as an outsider, because talk about a wild show, like actually truly experimental music. I had no idea what was going to happen, bringing together the field, i.e. these Japanese DJs, with the home base, which, you know, my crowd at Cornell was like the avant-garde classical new music world. And, you know, and also like this just straight up classical world. So that was really challenging because unfortunately the pianists just had a real chip on their shoulder about these Japanese dudes. And they kind of wanted nothing to do with them. And then the Japanese guys, there's this kind of, I guess, a stereotype. You know, Japanese society is very regimented. Everyone has their role. Everyone has to kind of stay within their, you know, their role in the hierarchy. And so there's this idea that America is like, oh, the US, oh, that's where I can go and just be crazy. But like every society has their own social hierarchy. Every society has their own, like, you have to be polite, you know. There's this kind of stereotype that like, oh, I don't have to be polite in America. Well, you don't have to. The world's not going to end, but it would really help out if you did. Like, I remember one time I woke up and one of the guys that they were all staying in my house, he threw a bunch of pistachio shells into my garbage disposal in my sink to see what would happen. And he's like, why did you do that?
Maybe he was recording the sound.
He was just like, I wanted to see what would happen, man. And I'm like, well, now I have to deal with that. But thank you. So it was a real collision of worlds. I wouldn't do it again, but I'm glad that I did, because the other thing too that was interesting was the Japanese guys, seeing them interact with like everyday facets of American culture or Americana, not necessarily music. For example, bringing them to like a sushi restaurant. They were like, wow, this California roll ain't half bad. Like, that was kind of funny. Or my friend let us borrow her car, and it was like this kind of crappy old Ford, and they're like, so this is a Ford. Like, it's like kind of broken. Like, so that was really interesting too.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, you ended up DJing for the first time, right, in Japan?
Yes, I did.
So, so this was, but this was part of a test of, you have dance-oriented DJs, and yet all of this is automatically countercultural because there's anti-dance laws in Japan.
That there are.
So do people dance or no?
Well, so just to preface, the anti-dance law, you have to have a special permit, and the permit is only given to clubs that have like a big enough space, and those sorts of clubs are typically, like especially before the Olympics, they were supported by the government and by state local infrastructure to get tourists to want to come and enjoy nightlife.
Right.
But the smaller clubs where the actual experimental music making is happening, those routinely, like cops would drive by and people would just like stop playing music. It was wild. So in terms of my DJ show, it was at this little basement hole-in-the-wall club that I effectively lived in Tokyo. I just love that place to this day. I wish I could find equivalent spaces.
What's the name of it?
I cannot say for anonymity purposes. I don't want to. I don't want to out the place.
You don't want to shut them down.
I don't want to shut them down, exactly. But plus the inner hipster in me is like, that's my space. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But my first DJ show, I mean, vinyl to me is a sacred thing. I never buy vinyl online. It's only what I find out in the world. And I listen to a lot of particular kinds of music on vinyl as a result. I have a lot of disco, I have a lot of jazz, and I have a lot of just weird stuff, and I have some classical too. And my vinyl collection it's my baby, one of them. And so with this show in Tokyo that I put together, my first time ever DJing, I wanted to spin my vinyl, and a lot of it is dance music. Like Benny Goodman, that is dance music.
Right.
Sun Ra, Dance of the Cosmo Aliens, you can get down to that. That's like some hardcore techno in another alternate universe. Quite literally, given his intergalactic proclivities.
Right.
But that being said, I wanted to kind of play something that wasn't like, okay, this is Miami bass. Oh, okay, this is like hardcore techno. Like, here's Benny Goodman. Are y'all gonna dance?
Mix everything.
Yeah. Like, are you guys gonna dance? Is this still gonna be countercultural? Like, technically, this is dance music, and it was a really fun show. It was wacky, and that was not necessarily what I was going for, but I think what ends up happening.
Cool. Like Benny Goodman and Michi. Yeah. Wow. Okay, all of your research concluded before COVID hit, so
Yes,
you
it
have
did.
not been back to Japan since then. Are you looking forward to going back?
I am hoping to go back this year. I think that'd be really great, and I'm very much looking forward to it because the dancers that effectively adopted me as their protege. The word is kohai in Japanese. Up in Ugo, Akita for the Nishimonaibo Modori, they are getting older, and the last time I danced with them, which was in 2017. So 2018 I took a break from all things Japan when I was done my research. 2019 I didn't go back for the festival. I went back in that winter, and then since then obviously I haven't been able to go back.
Right.
They're getting older, and the last time I danced with them, the oldest of the bunch, she's in her 80s now, said you have to come back every year to dance. Like, it's very important. I don't know how many years I have left, but you need to come back and dance. So that is ringing in my mind.
That's good.
So hopefully I can do that. The other stuff will be there no matter what.
Well, that ties in with my last question. I wanted you to, if you could read a passage, and this was after you had danced, Ondo, is that how you say it?
Ondo, yes.
Ondo, yeah, so how you felt a little bit, and also just how your dance teacher, who was, you had an interesting relationship with her, but if you could read that passage, and we'll wrap it up.
Well, sure. And I just want to preface that this dance teacher, she ran the actual dance lessons at the community center where they were held, and then I don't want to say the old ladies, but the ladies who kind of adopted me as their protege, they were just like veteran dancers. So this dance teacher was more like actually in the formal, pedagogical scene, I guess, of the Nishimonaibo Odori. And I'll also just preface to say that she kind of did everything she could to get me not to dance in a very subtle Japanese way, trying to say, oh, well, you can't get the kimono made in time, and oh, it's going to be $3,000, but oh, too bad, or oh, I wonder if they'll have sandals in your size for your big American feet, oh, and stuff like that. But my teachers that actually worked with me and became my friends, my Japanese fairy godmothers, they kind of said, nope, we can definitely hook you up with a kimono. No, you can definitely dance. Like, there's no rules. This is all just kind of bullying. But instead of being offended by the bullying, I thought of it as a research moment, and I will read henceforth. So, I may never know what the dance me being there, and it mostly doesn't matter. I am confident in the integrity of my actions, and I made real relationships with people in Akita as a result of working hard to learn the dance. Plus, it's healthier to let go of worrying about what other people think than to catastrophize worst-case scenarios anyway. Nonetheless, even though it stung to have never won her outright approval, although that surprised smile during the classroom observation cannot be discounted, I can understand where she was coming from. Here comes this walking caricature of an American, bopping along with her blonde hair and her blue eyes and her toothy smile and her mission. She likes Japan, and she wants to learn about this tiny pocket untouched by rampant Americanization. Tee-hee! But as a child, the dance teacher endured life in the Empire, resisting the Western barbarians, and suffered through the Pacific War, when the Americans with their blonde hair and their blue eyes and their toothy smiles and their mission were dropping nuclear bombs on civilians, children, and animals. And later, she likely saw the Americans driving around in their jeeps, telling the naughty Japanese how to be a proper nation state with bubblegum disregard for a society that has existed for thousands of years, all while foisting upon them this thing called global capitalism, the very apparatus that threatens Nishimonai's existence today. Even now, it's still the Americans who come to Japan and get too drunk and too loud on vacation, commit hopeless social faux pas like walking into a house without taking off their shoes, and commit crimes on military bases that sprawl throughout the archipelago. She has every reason not to trust me. And how sickeningly ironic it is that it's an American who's conducting this research project, asking the same questions about this festival and the dancers and the festival organizers and local school teachers are asking themselves. Is it not topsy-turvy that an American has tapped into this struggle and is just as concerned about the uniformity sprawling in the wake of globalization, westernization, as an older generation of Japanese who recognize less and less the country they call home? It's simply absurd that the American was more often than not the only dancer there under middle age, while the young people of Ugo don't show much interest in it beyond obligation, much less the dedication to come to every rehearsal each month, much less from Tokyo. How can it be that this is the world we live in? I'm not sure either, but it is what it is, and with the humility that I have learned by spending time in Japan in the first place, I accept that.
All right. Thank you very much, Jillian Marshall. We've enjoyed learning about your ethnomusicology study.
Pleasure's all mine.
This is the book that all of these stories are in. It's called Japanthem, Countercultural Experiences, Cross-Cultural Remixes, published by Three Rooms Press. It's available now. And look for the link in the description. And also I'm Kat Georges, and on behalf of everyone at Three Rooms Press, I'd like to thank Kinokuniya for having us here today. Thank you very much.